He invited his poor ex-wife to his party to disgrace her. She arrived in a private jet with her daughter. Raymond's plan to publicly humiliate Alice at his grand celebration backfires spectacularly when she steps off a private jet, her young daughter, Mia, in tow. This shocking entrance forces everyone, especially Raymond, to reckon with the assumptions they've made about Alice and the woman she has become. Raymond, a successful businessman, invites his ex-wife Alice to his lavish party, thinking it's the perfect opportunity to show her just how much better his life is without her. He expects her to show up embarrassed and defeated. Instead, Alice arrives with Mia, looking every bit the confident woman she's become. With a calm, poised presence, Alice steps down from the jet, her new life clearly on display for all to see. Raymond's carefully crafted moment of victory is instantly undone, and what follows is a confrontation that will change everything for both of them. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to our channel and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. Raymond sat at the head of the dining table, his usual air of superiority hanging over the room. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his eyes scanning his phone as if the world revolved around him. Alice, seated across from him, pushed her food around her plate, the weight of the silence between them thickening with each passing second. It had been like this for months, weeks even. No matter how many times she tried to talk to him, Raymond remained distant, his eyes always on something else. "I'm going to be late for my meeting," Raymond said abruptly, standing up without so much as a glance in her direction. Alice didn't speak. Didn't beg for his attention. She'd tried that, but it never worked. He would only get more frustrated, more distant. "Do you even notice me anymore?" she whispered to herself, the words slipping out before she could stop them. But Raymond didn't hear. He was already heading for the door, his briefcase in hand. She sat there for a long while as after staring at the empty space where he had been, wondering when they had drifted so far apart. Was it something she'd done? Or had it always been this way? Only now she could see it. The lavish gifts, the dinners at expensive restaurants, the trips abroad, all of it felt meaningless in the face of the cold distance between them. She had tried, really tried, to be the wife he wanted. But with every passing day, she felt like a stranger in her own home. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when their laughter filled the house, when they talked about their future, about the family they would build. But that had been before the years of infertility, before the endless doctor's visits, the medications, the failed treatments. When they couldn't have children, something inside Raymond seemed to snap. His resentment began to show in the small ways, dismissive words, cold glares, the absence of tenderness. One evening, after another failed attempt at IVF, Raymond returned home late, his mood darker than ever. Alice, exhausted from another long day at work and another round of negative results, sat in the living room, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "Alice," Raymond's voice broke through the silence. She looked up, seeing the tightness in his jaw, the frustration in his eyes. "I'm done," he said flatly, as if he were telling her the weather report. "I can't keep doing this. We've been trying for years, and nothing's working. I need a wife who can give me children, not someone who keeps dragging me down." Alice's heart shattered, her chest tightening as his words hit her like a physical blow. "Raymond," she whispered, her voice trembling, "please, I love you. I want this too, but it's not in my hands. Don't—" He cut her off, his voice harsh. "I've had enough. I need someone who can give me a family, Alice. You're not it. You never were." With that, Raymond turned on his heel and left the room. Alice sat there, numb, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. She had been a failure in his eyes, nothing more than a disappointment. The following days blurred together in a haze of tears and quiet acceptance. She packed her things, the once vibrant home now suffocating her with its emptiness. When the papers were finalized, Raymond's face was devoid of emotion, as though their entire marriage had meant nothing more than a contract. He was done, and so was she. But beneath the heartbreak, beneath the hollow ache of her lost dreams, Alice found something else. Determination. She wasn't going to let this destroy her. Not again. With each tear that fell, she knew she would rebuild. Stronger, wiser, and ready to show the world that she was more than just Raymond's ex-wife. She was Alice, and she would rise again. The days after the divorce felt like an endless blur. Alice moved through them as if walking in a fog, her heart still aching from Raymond's final words. But she wasn't going to let herself break, not anymore. The first few weeks were the hardest, but slowly, something inside her began to shift. Mia, her little girl, was a constant source of light, her laughter breaking through the quiet nights. Alice focused on her, on being the mother Mia deserved, the woman Mia needed. She enrolled in a local business program, determined to learn more about the world she'd neglected while she'd been caught in the shadows of Raymond's life. At first, it was overwhelming. The textbooks were thick and the terms unfamiliar, but Alice found a spark she hadn't felt in years. She buried herself in her studies, staying up late into the night, working tirelessly to rebuild her sense of self. Her life had been put on pause for so long, revolving around Raymond's needs, and now, for the first time, she could breathe. The mornings were busy with getting Mia ready for school, packing lunches and dropping her off with a kiss on her cheek. Then the rest of the day was hers to shape as she saw fit. Some days she worked at a local cafe, learning the ropes of customer service, and other days she volunteered at a nearby non-profit. She found fulfillment in helping others, in being needed in ways that didn't come with the expectations Raymond had placed on her. Each small victory, from managing her bills to receiving praise from her boss, built her confidence. But it wasn't just work that Alice focused on, it was her own healing. She took up yoga, something she had always been curious about but never had time for. The quiet stillness of each session allowed her to reflect, to release the pain that had been building inside her for years. She spent time in nature, walking through the parks, breathing in the fresh air, and letting her mind wander. It was there, in the silence of the trees and the rhythm of her own steps, that Alice began to hear her own voice again. She wasn't just the woman who had been discarded by her husband. She was Alice, capable of more than she had ever imagined. As the months passed, her life started to come together in a way that felt whole, complete. Mia thrived in school, her smile brighter than ever, and Alice could see the subtle changes in herself. Her posture was straighter, her steps more confident. She had learned to rely on herself, to find strength in the quiet moments, to let go of the past. One evening, after putting Mia to bed, Alice sat down at her small desk and opened her laptop. She had been working on a business idea for a few weeks now, something that had started as a vague dream but was slowly taking shape. A catering business, focused on healthy, home-cooked meals for busy professionals. The thought of building something from the ground up gave her a sense of purpose, a feeling she had never had in her marriage. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. And in that moment, with the soft glow of her desk lamp illuminating her face, Alice knew she was on the path to something bigger than she had ever dared to imagine. The scars of her past were still there, but they no longer defined her. She had found her own strength, and with it, she knew she was capable of facing whatever came next. Raymond sat behind his sleek, polished desk, his fingers lightly tapping the surface as he stared out the window at the city skyline. His office was pristine, the furniture expensive, and the view, always the view, gave him a sense of control, a reminder that he had built all of this with his own hands. His life looked perfect, the envy of everyone who knew him. He had the house, the cars, the prestige. His business was thriving, his social circle was full of influential names, and he had a new fiancée, Ivana, who was everything Alice never was, beautiful, ambitious, and capable of providing him with the future he had always wanted. But even with all the success and new beginnings, there was a gnawing emptiness inside him. It wasn't something he liked to acknowledge, but it was always there. a quiet whisper at the back of his mind that refused to be ignored. He tried to bury it with more work, more events, more distractions, but it followed him like a shadow. Alice, his ex-wife, the woman he had discarded like a piece of trash. She was the one thing that continued to haunt him, no matter how far he moved on. He'd convinced himself that it was her fault, her inability to give him a child, her inability to be the woman he needed. He had spent years resenting her for it, and when she couldn't give him the family he had always dreamed of, he had made the decision to cut her out of his life. He'd done it with the cold detachment of a man who was ready to move on, but in the stillness of his large, empty bed at night, he often wondered if he had made the right choice. He had told himself he was done with her, that he was better off without her. But there were nights when he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering where she was, if she was okay. Did she ever think of him? Did she regret leaving? Did she cry herself to sleep like he sometimes did? The thought was uncomfortable, a reminder of the guilt he had buried deep inside. He thought about the way Alice had looked before the divorce, so defeated, so crushed by his rejection. But there was a part of him that couldn't forget how strong she had once been. How, in the beginning, she had been full of life, full of hope. When had he lost that? When had he become so blinded by his own ego that he had pushed her away? Ivana, his fiancée, was everything Alice hadn't been, and he reminded himself of that every time he saw her. She was strong, confident, and, most importantly, fertile. He had always thought that once he found a woman who could give him children, all his problems would be solved. But even now, with Ivana by his side, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had tried to bury his past with Alice, tried to erase the years they had spent together, but deep down, he knew he would never fully escape it. His mind often wandered back to their marriage, to the way things had once been before everything had fallen apart. The dinners they used to have, the way they had laughed together, the promises they had made. And now, with his upcoming wedding to Ivana, Raymond felt a strange emptiness inside him. He wasn't sure if it was because of Alice or because he was no longer the man he had once been. There was a distance between him and the life he had built, something intangible but undeniable. He had everything he thought he wanted, and yet, the resentment toward Alice still simmered beneath the surface. She was gone, but somehow she wasn't. She had left him, but the anger, the regret, the quiet ache of a lost love still clung to him. And as much as he tried to move forward, he couldn't help but feel that something was missing, something he would never truly find, not with Ivana or anyone else. Raymond leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. The decision had been made, and the invite was already drafted, the envelope sealed and ready to go. His office was filled with the hum of quiet activity outside, but inside it was all stillness. He couldn't shake the feeling of anticipation creeping up his spine. It had been 3 years since the divorce, and yet Alice's shadow still lingered over him. He hadn't truly moved on, not in the way he told himself. Sure, he had a new life now, with Ivana by his side, but there were moments, fleeting moments, when the memories of Alice would surface. He would recall the quiet dinners at home, the way she had once smiled at him across the table, and how it had felt like everything was still possible. That was before the pressure of their failed attempts at having a child had torn them apart. Before he'd convinced himself that she wasn't enough. But now, Raymond had everything. Success, wealth, status, and a beautiful fiancée who was everything Alice hadn't been. And he had every intention of rubbing it in her face. Alice had been the one to walk away, but Raymond wanted her to see what she had lost. He wanted her to see him thriving, to see his new life without her, and understand, once and for all, that it had been her inability to give him the family he craved that had pushed him to make the hardest decision of his life. So he had decided to invite her to his grand party. It wasn't just a casual invitation. No, this was a show. He'd make sure she saw the glittering lights of his success. He would flaunt his new life in front of her, watch her squirm in the midst of his friends and colleagues, and prove to her that she had been the one to fail him, not the other way around. He thought of her, sitting alone in whatever life she had managed to piece together after their divorce. Was she still grieving? Was she as bitter as he imagined? He doubted she had moved on. After all, who could? Who could walk away from the life they'd shared with someone as successful as him? He didn't know why he was still angry at her. Maybe it was the memories of her tears, of her begging him to stay, or the way she had just given up when their marriage had crumbled. With a deep breath, he pushed the button on his desk and instructed his assistant to send the invitation to Alice. He'd made sure it was perfect, placed it front and center on the guest list, front row seating for Alice, right where she could see everything. He'd thought of every detail, from the extravagant decor to the exclusive guest list. This was his moment. He would show her what she had lost. Raymond stood up, walked over to the window, and stared out at the skyline. He was finally free of her, wasn't he? He had moved on. His hands tightened into fists, but the nagging question remained. Why did it feel like she was still a part of his life, even after everything? The invitation was sent. The stage was set. And for the first time in a long while, Raymond felt a familiar flutter of uncertainty in his chest. Alice sat quietly at her kitchen table, the invitation resting in front of her like a weight she hadn't expected to carry. The envelope was thick, embossed with gold lettering. Raymond's party, it read, with the event details printed neatly beneath. She ran her fingers along the edges, her heart racing as she thought about the years that had passed since she'd last seen him. The bitterness had faded, replaced by a quiet resolve. But the invitation felt like a challenge, a reminder of everything she had left behind. At first, she had considered ignoring it. She didn't owe Raymond anything. He had made his choice all those years ago, and she had walked away with nothing but a broken heart and a promise to herself that she would rebuild her life. But now, as she sat staring at the pristine invitation, something inside her shifted. She wasn't the same woman who had left their marriage in tears. That woman, the one who doubted her worth and questioned her every decision, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had found a new life, her own life. The thought of seeing Raymond again stirred something in her, but it wasn't anger. It was a quiet sense of pride, a pride in what she had accomplished on her own. Alice wasn't attending to get revenge. She wasn't going to make a scene or demand an apology. She was going to show him what he had missed. She was going to walk into that party with her head held high, not as the woman he had discarded, but as the woman who had risen from the ashes of their failed marriage. Her fingers brushed against the delicate fabric of her dress as she thought about what she would wear. She didn't need to flaunt anything. She just wanted to be seen for who she had become. Something simple, yet elegant, a dress that spoke of grace, of strength. She wasn't trying to compete with Ivana, Raymond's fiancée, or anyone else. This wasn't about them. This was about Alice, about showing herself, not just Raymond or anyone else, how far she had come. As the days passed, she focused on the small details, booking the sitter for Mia, making sure she looked flawless, without looking like she was trying too hard. Mia had been the light of her life, and Alice was determined to show her what a woman could achieve when she put herself first. Every little victory she had won in the past year, from getting her business off the ground to finding her own peace, felt like another stepping stone toward this moment. The night of the party arrived, and Alice stood before her mirror, her reflection staring back at her, strong, poised, and self-assured. She was no longer the woman who had been shattered by Raymond's departure. She was someone new, someone whole. And when she walked into that party, she would do so with the quiet knowledge that she had found success, not because of Raymond, but in spite of him. As she walked out the door, her hand on the doorknob, she took one last breath, steadying herself. The world was hers, and tonight she would show everyone, including herself, that she had truly moved on. She wasn't there to fight. She was there to shine. The ballroom was bathed in golden light, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filling the air as Raymond stood at the center of it all, basking in the attention. The walls were lined with expensive art, the floor gleaming like marble beneath the feet of his guests, all of them admiring the opulence of his latest triumph. The room hummed with conversation, the chatter of high society mixed with the soft melodies of a live band in the corner. Raymond couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, watching his guests mingle and enjoy the fruits of his hard work. This was his world, the one he had built from the ground up. Ivana was at his side, her smile radiant as she greeted their friends and colleagues with grace. She looked perfect, her dress a stunning shade of emerald green that shimmered under the lights, her hair carefully styled in loose waves that framed her face just so. Raymond couldn't help but glance at her every now and then, impressed by the way she fit into his life. She was everything Alice wasn't, bold, beautiful, and capable of bringing the future he'd always dreamed of. She was exactly what he needed, or so he told himself. He raised his glass, his fingers cold against the crystal, and smiled to himself. Tonight was about proving everything. Alice, his ex-wife, would be here soon, seated among the guests, as a reminder of what he had left behind. He imagined her face when she saw him, when she realized how much better off he was. He had planned this moment for weeks, knowing that her presence would serve as the perfect juxtaposition to his newfound success. She was his past, a past he had moved on from, and tonight he would make sure she knew it. The doors to the ballroom opened, and a hush fell over the room for a moment as a group of guests entered. Raymond looked up, thinking it was just another wave of people arriving, but then his eyes caught the silhouette in the doorway. For a brief second, he froze. His heart skipped, and he felt a pang of confusion. Alice stepped into the room, and the moment seemed to stretch, the noise of the party dimming in his ears. She looked incredible, better than he remembered. Her posture was straight, her face composed, and there was an air of confidence about her that was impossible to ignore. She wasn't alone. At her side, her young daughter Mia held her hand, the little girl looking up at her mother with wide eyes. Alice didn't glance around, didn't falter. She moved through the crowd with quiet grace, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Raymond's breath caught in his chest, and for a moment he couldn't move. The image of Alice standing there, calm and collected, shattered his carefully constructed sense of superiority. He had expected her to walk in looking defeated, broken by the years that had passed, but instead she seemed to glow with a quiet strength, a woman transformed. Guests turned their heads as Alice made her way through the room, whispering among themselves. Raymond felt a mixture of disbelief and frustration bubbling inside him. How was this possible? How had she done this? Hadn't he left her broken? He had imagined this moment so many times, but never like this, never with Alice so composed, so poised. As she approached the front, Raymond finally moved, his legs heavy beneath him as he made his way toward her, trying to mask the shock. But Alice didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She simply walked past him, her eyes straight ahead, and took her seat in the front row, the seat he had reserved for her, the seat meant for someone humiliated. Raymond's mind raced, but the room was already buzzing with murmurs, eyes flicking from him to Alice. He could feel the weight of their gaze, the shift in the atmosphere as they realized the woman they thought they knew had become something entirely different. And in that moment, he knew. The game had changed. Alice wasn't the woman he had left behind. She was something far stronger than he could have ever imagined. The evening was unfolding exactly as Raymond had envisioned. His guests mingled, glasses of champagne in hand, voices floating over the soft music in the background. The room was a portrait of elegance, the chandeliers above casting their shimmering light over every polished surface. Raymond stood by the entrance, his arms crossed, a small smile tugging at his lips. He had prepared for this moment for weeks. His plan was foolproof. Alice would arrive, awkward and out of place, and he would watch her squirm as he basked in his success. He was ready for the satisfaction of seeing her realize how much better his life had become without her. Then, As if the universe decided to shift the energy in the room, a murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Raymond's smile faltered as the hum of conversation seemed to slow. He turned, his eyes following the sudden movement at the entrance. A private jet, sleek and black, sat on the edge of the grand driveway. It was an unexpected sight for the guests who had been too absorbed in their conversations to notice the distant plane landing. The door to the jet opened, and from the haze of evening light, Alice appeared. She stepped down from the plane with a quiet confidence, her posture straight, her expression serene. At her side, Mia held her hand, a small figure of grace and innocence. The sight was enough to stop Raymond dead in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. Alice wasn't the broken woman he had left behind. She wasn't meek and fragile. She was a force, a presence that commanded attention. The guests around him began to whisper in disbelief, their gazes shifting from Alice's composed figure to Raymond, who stood frozen, unable to fully process what he was seeing. His plan to humiliate her had backfired spectacularly. There was nothing awkward about Alice's entrance, nothing out of place. She moved through the crowd with ease, her eyes focused straight ahead, her demeanor calm and collected, as though she owned the room. Raymond felt his stomach tighten as he watched her glide toward the entrance, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. Her dress, a deep blue that complemented her skin perfectly, moved with her every step, an image of understated elegance. Mia, her daughter, walked beside her, her small hand wrapped around Alice's, her wide eyes taking in the grandeur of the room. The guests stood in awe, their whispers louder now. Who was this woman who had arrived in a jet, surrounded by an aura of strength and grace? Raymond's heart raced as Alice took her seat in the front row, precisely where he had planned for her to sit, the place meant for the woman who had once been discarded. But there was nothing meek about her presence. It was as if she were sitting on a throne, her quiet confidence radiating in every direction. And as Raymond's eyes met hers, there was no trace of defeat, no sign of humiliation. Instead, her gaze was steady, calm, unchanged. She was the woman she had always been, but now she was something far more powerful. In that moment, Raymond realized something that shattered him more than he could have imagined. Alice wasn't just moving on. She had thrived. She had built a life he could never have envisioned for her. And in doing so, she had taken the power he had once held over her and turned it into something all her own. And it was then that Raymond understood this wasn't about him anymore. This was Alice's story. She was the one who had won. Raymond stood there for a moment, frozen in place, his mind racing. He had prepared for everything except this, Alice. In his mind, she had been a distant memory, something he had erased from his life, a part of his past he had successfully buried beneath his new wealth, his new life. But now, as he stared across the room, his gaze locked onto her, that old familiar feeling of uncertainty crept back into his chest. He had always thought he was in control. The man who could command respect with a mere glance, the businessman who could bend situations to his will. But Alice, standing there with Mia by her side, effortlessly commanding the attention of everyone in the room, was completely out of his control. His carefully crafted world of success, the facade he had built with his new fiancée, Ivana, was suddenly beginning to crack. He took a deep breath, forced a smile, and straightened his posture. This wasn't a moment of defeat. This was just a small surprise, a blip in the perfect evening he had orchestrated. He could still salvage this. He could still be the one in control. Walking toward her, Raymond kept his expression neutral, masking the frustration that threatened to seep through. The whispers around him grew louder, but he ignored them, focusing only on Alice. She hadn't looked at him yet, but he was sure she knew he was coming. "Alice," he said, his voice smooth, tinged with the practiced calm he had perfected over the years. "What a surprise. I didn't expect to see you here tonight. I must admit, I thought you'd be, well, different." Alice didn't flinch. She didn't even look up at him immediately. Her eyes remained steady, focused on Mia, who was now playing with a toy beside her, completely oblivious to the tense atmosphere around her. "Alice, Raymond started again, but she cut him off, her voice calm but unwavering. "You invited me here to prove something, didn't you?" she said, her eyes lifting to meet his. The words weren't spoken with anger, but with quiet authority. "To show me how much better your life is without me. To make sure I saw how much I've been replaced. But Raymond, you're mistaken if you think this is about you." The crowd fell silent as Alice stood, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. Raymond's breath hitched. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no sign of the broken woman he had discarded. She was strong, calm, unbothered. "I'm not here to fight," Alice continued, her voice steady as she took a step toward him, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm here to show you that I've moved on, that I've built a life of my own, a better life. One where I am happy and successful, not just surviving in the shadow of your expectations." Raymond's chest tightened. He had expected her to be small, to cringe, to feel the sting of his success and crumble in front of him. But instead, she stood taller than ever, a woman transformed. She was no longer the wife who had begged him to stay, no longer the woman who had lived for his approval. She was something entirely different. "You were never the problem," Alice said, her voice softer now, but carrying a weight that made Raymond's stomach churn. "I was never the problem. You just couldn't see it, and that's why we're here now. You tried to break me, Raymond, but you didn't, and now I'm stronger because of it." The room seemed to hold its breath as Alice's words hung in the air. Raymond's facade cracked just for a moment, but it was enough to make him feel small, to make him question everything he had believed. Alice wasn't his prey anymore. She was free, and he was the one left to face the truth of his own actions. She turned away, her hand gently resting on Mia's shoulder. Without a word, Alice walked past him, her confidence radiating through the room, leaving Raymond standing there, speechless, as the whispers grew louder once again. The night was drawing to a close, the once vibrant chatter of the party fading into the background as Alice stood up from her seat. The murmurs of the guests had settled into whispers, but their eyes still lingered on her, still trying to understand the woman who had walked in, poised and unshaken, and had turned Raymond's carefully curated evening into a public reckoning. But Alice wasn't concerned with their stares. She wasn't there for them. She was there for herself. Mia, content and oblivious to the storm that had unfolded, smiled up at her mother, her small hand reaching for Alice's. Alice squeezed her daughter's hand gently, a soft smile curling on her lips. The pain of the past few years, the heartbreak and the uncertainty, seemed like a distant memory now, something that could no longer touch her. The woman who had entered that party was not the same woman who had walked away from Raymond. With quiet grace, Alice moved toward the exit. The eyes that followed her now weren't filled with judgment, but with awe. She had reclaimed herself, and in doing so, she had reclaimed her dignity. She had no need to prove herself to anyone anymore. Not Raymond, not anyone. Raymond, standing off to the side, watched her leave. His hands were clasped tightly in front of him, his jaw clenched in frustration. The party that had once seemed so perfect to him now felt hollow, like a performance that had suddenly turned into something he could no longer control. He had imagined so many different scenarios for tonight. Alice walking in, awkward and defeated, shrinking under the weight of his success. But the woman who had entered was not defeated. She was unrecognizable to him, and the realization gnawed at him, making him feel small in a way he hadn't felt in years. He had been so certain of himself, so convinced that he was in control of his life. But as Alice moved through the crowd with Mia by her side, his plan to humiliate her had crumbled, leaving him with nothing but the sharp sting of regret. He couldn't shake the image of her walking past him, her eyes steady, her presence calm and powerful. She wasn't broken. She was whole. The crowd had watched, some in stunned silence, others murmuring as Alice made her way to the door. There was no dramatic exit, no angry confrontation. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to fight. Her very presence was enough. And as she reached the door, Raymond felt a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. He had spent so long blaming Alice, convinced that she had been the one who had failed. But now, standing there in the remnants of his party, surrounded by the fading echoes of his pride, he knew the truth. It had never been her. It had always been him. Alice stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of the evening lifting from her shoulders. She breathed in deeply, the peace she felt almost overwhelming. For the first time in years, she was free. Free from the past, free from Raymond's expectations, free from the man who had tried to define her. And as she walked away, Mia by her side, she knew that nothing could ever take away the strength she had found. The life she had built was hers, and no one, least of all Raymond, could take that from her.